So today with the crazy FPO news, I wanted to break it down a little bit and see where everything is happening and why it is happening the way it is. Let's get into it. Alright, so right off the bat, I have a very sketchy setup right now. I am moving, so I'm literally working on my floor and I have a microphone set up on my little box right here. So it may not be the best of setups, but hopefully you'll still be able to hear everything and see everything just fine. Just to recap, yesterday the Pro Tour announced that they'll be rescheduling a lot of the FPO events, aka, for the moment, what I foresee as canceling. There are a couple events that have remained, and a couple events will probably be actually rescheduled, but what that actually looks like is still pretty unclear, so I tend to err on the side of it probably will just not look like how you would expect it to look like, therefore no one's going to treat it as such. And if you are a fan like me, let's say you have tickets to D-Glow, and if half the event is not there, then like, is it the same event? Kinda not really. So overall, it's just a total kind of mess. Like, there's just nobody that's really super happy right now. I know Katrina Allen said that she was happy with the changes that were made, but for everybody else that kind of is dependent upon this, like money and revenue coming in, as players, media, even sponsors surely depend on the awareness that they get from these events. There's just a lot of bad stuff going on right there. So I wanted to kind of break it down and figure out why this is happening the way it is. And I thought I would try to find a little diagram to figure out what is important to the tour and what is not. So let me attempt to try to show you. Also, it's early right now. I'm probably not looking the best right now, but you guys don't care. All right. So first off, we have players. Now, players are pretty obviously indispensable. You cannot have a tour, you cannot have anything without your players. But it definitely doesn't seem like they're like the top priority sometimes, because like right now, I think Yuli's like the main player advocate for the board. I don't know how often he's actually participating on the board. So really the players are, while they are vital to the tour, they don't often get represented in the way that you might guess that they would. For being such an open and close-knit family in the world of disc golf, the players actually don't get much representation, really, unless it's like the biggest of the big names. And then we have manufacturers, and I would say they have the highest ability to kind of branch out away from everything. They are obviously the number one thing in disc golf that you need, because you can't throw discs without a disc golf manufacturer, and they are getting more plentiful by the day. There's always new brands coming out. You got your Trash Panda, who just released a very sick mid. So even everyday people are able to start releasing their own brands. But it's really just kind of like the big brands. You got Prodigy, MVP, Discraft, Innova. I would say they really have the biggest ability to move from, let's say, one tour to the next without having too much entanglement with everybody else, because they are so fundamentally kind of required for everybody involved. And then before we even get to the Pro Tour, I would say the last section here is post-produced. And right now, even though Jomez is part of the Pro Tour, let's just assume that post-produced means any third party that is filming a disc golf round. Now, these people can be anybody and everybody. It does not have to be exclusive unless they have exclusive rights. But in the future, if it's not Jomez, it could be anybody else. It would still be relatively the same experience, just maybe without all the amazing editing that Jomez does. So there we have post-produced. And then we have the Pro Tour. Now, I will say the PDGA is kind of like closely affiliated with the Pro Tour, but they are two separate entities, so I'm going to treat them as such. So the Pro Tour is basically just a business. It is the business that runs all of the professional disc golf events, and therefore they don't really have too much obligation to really care about anybody in particular, because fundamentally they are just a business. So you can perceive this as good, bad, whatever. It is just the way it is. And because of that, they are reliant on their shareholders. And the majority shareholder is Todd Rainwater. He is a billionaire that bought the tour in 2019, and overall he's done great things. I think it has been a very good change to get a little bit more professionalism on the tour, and just overall getting a little bit more funding has always been a good thing for disc golf, because it is just so hard to get actual money in the sport. But here we see the downside of the implication of that, when you do have a singular person that can make unilateral decisions on the entire business as a whole. And I see that as what happened with this entire cancellation of FPO. So if you're Jeff Spring, you have kind of just been doing what's best for the tour. you really don't have the same power that you might guess that he has. I think it is very, very much so. Todd Rainwater announces what needs to be done, and Jeff Spring is just the person that executes on that. So I really don't place any blame on Jeff Spring. I think this is probably, in my speculation, this is pure speculation, but I think this is probably just a decision with Todd Rainwater. And the reason that I see that as the way it is because the decision was just made so haphazardly. It felt like there was just very little awareness from players. Sure, there was talks from like Cat Merch saying like, yeah, with the tour being canceled, like I want to make sure I play this last event. And like other than that, I would say no real players knew anything about like the severity of what was going to happen. And I know we still have the tour. We still have all these events that are scheduled to happen. But for right now, I just don't see that happening. And even if it does happen, like to what degree is it actually meaningful? Because if you don't have the same tour money, you don't have the same fans, you don't have the same spectator tickets, you don't have the same experience, because it's not going to be a singular event that you can watch MPO and FPO. It is like something else. And like what kind of fan is going to buy new tickets if they already bought tickets to D-Glow when you already know that you want to watch D-Glow? Like it is kind of madness here. And so back to it, with this diagram, we can kind of see where everybody connects and how they connect to each other. You have your players that are part of the post-produced, because obviously you need post-produced to watch the players. You have the manufacturers that are not reliant on anybody, but they do have a major involvement on the Pro Tour with the players, like a major involvement with the players. And then you have the players that are kind of dependent on every single piece, but also kind of not, besides the sponsors. But they also make no money if they don't have the Pro Tour. So it's kind of a gray line with the players, but they're pretty big, obviously. And for the PDGA, I'm just kind of going to put them in a little corner. I know that they have involvement, but I'm not sure to what degree. And I don't think they really decided this call. So I think it's just going to be like detached from everybody. They're not really related to the Pro Tour, but also seem to have a major affiliation with the Pro Tour. And it's just a weird connecting system that I don't fully understand. So I'm not even going to try to explain it. So with that all spelled out, I think it is definitely possible. And this was mentioned in the Foundation podcast. Definitely watch it if you guys haven't. The potential of somebody swooping in and creating a new tour. This was kind of outrageous when I thought about it, but the more that I kind of realized how actually good this could be and how it's definitely possible with just one person, the more I was like, yeah, this might actually occur. And the reason that I say that is if Todd Rainwater can't allocate enough funds to have the Pro Tour be a thing, then obviously there's room for somebody to swoop in and make their own tour with a much more concrete set of rules and guidelines to be followed, and have more budget for what is inevitably going to be more lawsuits. Even if it's not Natalie Ryan, there's going to be so many things in the disc golf world that have yet to be realized, and so we're definitely not going to be done with lawsuits. There's already brands out there that exist that are obvious like rips on other brands, and so there's lots of potential for other lawsuits in the disc golf world. I think it's definitely possible for a bigger name or even potentially a bigger brand. Like, I don't think it would, but maybe like a Nike wants to start their own tour. That would be sick. And they can have a brand new, fresh start, have the Pro Tour kind of dissolve, and retain all these courses with the amazing TDs that currently exist, and create a new tour with most of the old staff. I think this would definitely be potentially a good solution because we can get a lot more funding that is so desperately needed for live coverage when there's so many spots out there that just aren't able to be played right now because we don't have the funding to get good camera gear, to get good networking. And I think the best part of disc golf right now has been wooded courses, and that just is very hard to come by when you don't have like any reception to do that because you have the lower end of equipment. And if we did have a much bigger brand on the Pro Tour that could run it, then we have a lot more ability to have that be done. So with this diagram, you can kind of see that it all is very possible. Like, I know this kind of sounds crazy right now, but it is definitely possible because all these tiers that aren't the Pro Tour are not reliant on the Pro Tour. They definitely have major connections with the Pro Tour, but they could just as easily have these connections with another tour. Players would be happy to play on a new course. They wouldn't mind. Manufacturers and sponsors, assuming that they would have the same amount of viewership, definitely wouldn't mind. Post-produced, obviously wouldn't mind because they're still doing the same type of thing. And if they can all assume a certain level of viewership, then I don't see why that couldn't be a thing. And so with that said, I definitely do not want this to occur. I do think it is exciting for the potential that could come of it with having all these new ideas and possibilities with a new tour and being less reliant on a singular person. But ultimately, it is still probably a negative thing for disc golf if this were to occur, because it would take so long to get back to where we are right now. But it is tough because let's say you're a pro player that doesn't really get top 5, doesn't really have the same amount of sponsors that other people get, that like the top 5 people get. Like let's say a Paige Shue. She is a world champion, but probably does not get the same amount of money, definitely doesn't get the same amount of money as, say, Kristen Tatar. So if you are a person that needed the rest of the tour to like keep your living and you don't have that, like I could not imagine how frustrating that would be. And sure, you could put blame on a certain person, but ultimately this was the tour's decision and nobody else's. And I think if you are a person like Paige, you would want to get a ton of heads up being like, hey, you may not have any source of revenue besides your sponsors for the rest of the season. I don't think that was given to the players. I think that is a major misstep, and it's kind of obvious this was done so haphazardly because there was no notice. There was nothing. Sure, there was rumors, and it was clear that the Pro Tour didn't have the funds to manage all these legal resources, but still, it was just very, very poorly done. Like a singular announcement on a Friday makes it seem like you're really trying to like brush under the rug. I just don't love that from the Pro Tour, and they have done so many amazing things that it's just kind of annoying to see. So with all that said, let's talk about the biggest factor, and that is fans. Fans support every single branch of this. They're obviously the number one linchpin that everything revolves around, and if you don't have fans, then you don't have events. And I would say most fans, while they might watch these side tier events, they're definitely not going to pay for a second ticket. So you really have to wonder like what is going to come of all this. Still pretty unclear. So I tend to err on the side of it probably will just not look like how you would expect it to look like. Therefore, no one's going to treat it as such. And then you kind of have a major problem, and it is going to be affecting every single piece of this tour. And with it being so overarching for the rest of the season, I don't really see this being something that you can just really come back from in a quick manner. I think this is going to be a very, very difficult thing for the Pro Tour to make right. And with all these other branches, they can work just fine on another Pro Tour. Fans will happily watch a new tour. Sure, the adoption rate might be a little bit slower, but it is definitely possible. And for me, I wouldn't want the new tour to be purely focused on having the most amount of money, because that still could have the same implications as the current tour, where you have a singular body making unilateral decisions that is not best for the tour. I don't want that to happen, but I do think you open up a lot more opportunities with a new tour, a broader board than just a singular billionaire that can make these decisions. Nothing wrong with billionaires, but I don't want a singular billionaire to be making these decisions. And I think there's just so much going for disc golf right now, and I really do not want to see it hindered just by one potentially haphazard call when everything is going so well for the sport. So with that said, what do you guys think? This is obviously crazy times that we're in. I did not foresee it looking like this. It is just totally insane that we even have to consider a new tour. It's crazy that we have a rest of the season that may not even have FPO. It is just totally bonkers, and I cannot believe it. But what do you guys think? Thank you so much for watching. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.